Well, welcome everybody to what is going to be the final virtual installment of our 2020 conference annual convention. Historically, we have had for 153 years an annual convention. We made it through a number of other pandemics, I guess, historically, but this one was one that we had to find alternatives for. So we've had 3 virtual meetings with membership so far. This is the final of those. And then we, just to give you a little heads up, we will be doing 14 Rally for Rural Colorado events around the state in the first part of September. So we're excited about that. We're excited to get out and see members and non-members alike. And we're excited to talk about issues that are important to rural Colorado. So again, let's go ahead and jump right into it with the next slide. So this was one of the things that I was looking forward to the most this year was being able to talk about marketing and communication and issues management. The Colorado Cattlemen's Association have a partnership with Colorado State University through a program called the Ranching Legacy Program. We have up to two symposiums a year. One of those takes place at our annual convention. And this was going to be the symposium topic in June and then in July, and now finally in August virtually for that symposium. Of course, none of this would be possible without several of our key sponsors, and I'd like to talk about, or actually let them talk about themselves, starting with Bank of Colorado, a long-term advocate for agriculture, rural Colorado, and a lender that we all turn to when we need skilled service. I believe they have a video now that they'd like to share with us.
Community. These core values aren't just something to hang on a wall. They're why we open our doors every day.
We're all in this together, and we need to work together.
Without community, we have nothing.
By staying true to our values, we'll continue to be here day after day, year after year. Because no matter how much we grow, we'll always be a community bank.
And we have one other message from another sponsor. If we can advance the slide. A little bit glitchy today, but one of our key partnerships is with the National Corn Growers and the Colorado Corn Growers through the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We're the biggest consumer of their product when it comes to fed cattle, and it's a partnership that we take very seriously. So we'll hear from the exec of the Colorado Corn Growers, Nick Kohlglazer.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Nicholas Kohlglazer, and I am the Executive Director of Colorado Corn. While I wish I could be with you all in person, sometimes, as we know in ag, you must play the hand that you are dealt. So, on behalf of Colorado Corn and the National Corn Growers Association, thank you so much for letting us join you today and letting us be part of this webinar. At Colorado Corn, we're always happy to partner with NCBA on events like this to help circulate information to folks in the industry. Cattle is a critical customer for corn, adding $5.7 billion in value. We're so very appreciative of this partnership and excited for all the good work ahead of us to achieve profitable, sustainable agriculture. Again, we appreciate the partnerships between our industries and organizations, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks to Colorado Corn and National Corn Growers. So we're blessed to have Kelly Maher with us today. Kelly's a nationally recognized political commentator and executive director for Compass Colorado. It's a center-right free market advocacy organization. Many of you probably recognize Kelly from a number of different venues, which I'm sure she'll mention today, but most notably, I think we see Kelly a lot on 9 News. She's certainly a voice for good government, conservative issues, and emphasizing the importance of individual freedoms, which I know in the cattle industry we support significantly. So Kelly, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for being part of this 2020 convention or convention, I guess a little bit off the normal, but I think that's the theme for 2020. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly. We'll pause the PowerPoint and let Kelly tell us a little bit about her perspectives and outlook, not only within agriculture, but beyond. Kelly?
Hey, Jerry, can you hear me?
I can, Kelly. Sound great.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. First and foremost, I really appreciate you all allowing me to talk to you today. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much to Terry and Aaron and for the entire Cattlemen's Association for putting this on. I would much rather be with you in person if I had the opportunity. Number one, I'm sure the food would be better. So that would be fantastic. And normally when I do speeches in person, I try to start off with like a joke or try to warm the crowd up a little bit. It is really weird sitting here in my kitchen talking to my computer. I wish I could talk to all of you and make a couple jokes. The joke I was planning back when I thought that we were going to be able to do this in person is in the crowd. Actually, this is my first time doing a speech where I have a family member in the crowd. So it's like extra stressful for me. And so the joke was going to be, if you like what I say, my father-in-law, Cliff Polk, is here. If you don't like what I say, I've never met the guy. So that's what I was going to lead with. Hopefully you're laughing at home because there's like no feedback from my computer. So hopefully that was at least somewhat humorous. But I'm here to tell you a little bit about where I see the political landscape right now and where I think we're going. There are some real opportunities, and clearly, especially in Colorado, we have some big challenges. First, I want to tell you a little bit about me. I have worked in Republican politics, so I realize not everybody here is a Republican, and that's okay. We forgive you. But my comments today are going to be from that perspective, from the conservative side. And if I'm happy, by the way, to take questions or to get pushback on some of that, but I think it's really important that I just convey where I'm coming from. I started off my career almost 2 decades ago working for a guy you might remember. His name was Bob Beaupre. He was a dairy farmer and then ran for Congress in 2002. He won his congressional district by 121 votes, which at the time was less than 1/3 of a vote per precinct. It was the tightest congressional race at the time in 2002. And he and his opponent at the time, a guy named Mike Feely, actually had to go to Washington, D.C. together to pick out the office because they had not yet declared who the winner was. So I worked for Bob for a number of years. It was great to get to work with him. And then throughout my time in politics, have worked really on both the policy, but also on the media side. And so what I wanted to talk to you about today is both what politics looks like nationally, filtered down then to the state level, and where I think there are real opportunities for agriculture and for the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, because I think there are some real threats. First and foremost, we're in the middle right now of the Republican National Convention. So that's a really big deal if you're a Republican. Everybody is trying to figure out in the midst of COVID how we are doing these meetings and how we're getting the opportunity to talk to people. The RNC is trying to figure that out as well. We had the DNC last week. You know, depending on which news you consume, either Donald Trump is toast this year or he's clearly going to win re-election. I think it is not yet set, but I will say that from what I've seen from the beginning of the RNC, we saw that there was almost 6 times as many people watching last night as we saw at the DNC, and there's clearly a lot of momentum behind that. I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch over the next few days and then see what happens in terms of debates. I think that debates nationwide will have quite a big impact because you really will hopefully have the opportunity to see the juxtaposition between our 2 presidential candidates. And obviously, not just the president, but the president's cabinet and what he does has a great effect on all of agriculture nationwide, but especially in Colorado as well. So that's the first thing. I don't think that the die is necessarily cast on that. I think that the president's race is still very much up in the air, and we shall see how that goes. One poll I thought was really fascinating that I want to note if you're kind of looking to read the tea leaves. By the way, after the last presidential race, I think anybody who looks at you and says, I know what is going to happen in the future based on polling data is lying to you. So that's really important that you take all of that we're seeing kind of with a grain of salt, because ultimately I think we are finding people who are not necessarily as honest or as forthright about how they intend to vote. But one poll I thought was really fascinating a couple weeks ago is that a majority of Democrats don't believe that if Joe Biden is elected president, that he would make it through 4 years. And I think that's really fascinating that even Democrats, and some might be on this meeting today, but a majority of Democrats believe that if they're casting their vote for Joe Biden, they are in fact also casting a vote for Kamala Harris for president at some point over the next 4 years. And so I think that one of the things we all need to make sure we're paying attention to is what a Harris administration would look like, because an even higher percentage of Republicans believe that, but the fact that a majority of Democrats believe that tells me that that's something that we need to be looking at and that's something that we need to be scrutinizing. I also think that when we're talking about the national landscape, obviously one of the most important and biggest races that we need to be looking toward is the Hickenlooper and Gardner race. That is going to be a real contest. And anybody who tells you that it's not has never met both gentlemen. Cory Gardner is one of the hands down best press the flesh retail politicians I've ever met in my entire life. And it also helps, by the way, that he is like a genuinely good guy. And it's one of his campaign staffers told me, and I take it to heart, to know Cory is to love Cory. Like, if you get the opportunity, and I'm sure many of the people on this meeting have, to get a chance to talk to Cory Gardner one-on-one, he is absolutely so good. And I think that is going to stand in stark juxtaposition to John Hickenlooper, who is well-liked and has done things that people like across the board, both as mayor of Denver and as governor in some instances. But I think one of the things not many people pay attention to when they're talking about Hickenlooper is that he hasn't had a really like tough, young, energetic opponent. He never really suffered the kind of scrutiny that I think that he will end up suffering in this race. We had his races for mayor, which were largely uncontested, especially as he got further down the road. He kind of ran on the aw shucks goofy thing that he had going on, the je ne sais quoi, if you will. And then he ended up running for governor. If everybody remembers that year, it was against both Dan Mays and Tom Tancredo. And that they ended up splitting the conservative side. And that was his first race for governor. Second race was against Bob Beaupre, who I think did as good of a job as possible, but he was already well-liked and very popular. And that was going to be a tough race. And now we're sitting here and we have a guy who has continuously told not just Coloradans, but the nation that he doesn't actually want this job, that he's not cut out for this job, that he doesn't actually want to be a senator. What he really wants to be is president. And this is his consolation prize. I think it's really important that Coloradans remember that our senator, one of our two senators, shouldn't just take it as his backup plan. That's offensive to Coloradans. It's offensive to all of us. And I have seen over the course of some of the meetings that he's had and some of the forums that he's done, he's just not setting Democrats on fire. From what I can tell, they've kind of just accepted that, like, sure, he's our guy, I guess, the same way that he's accepted, sure, this is the job that I guess I want since I can't be president. Ah, shucks. I really think that once he ends up on a stage with Cory and once we start to really get down the road over the next 7 weeks in terms of what that head-to-head looks like, it's going to tighten up even more than we've seen it already. So I think that if we're looking from a national perspective of what is going to be one of the major drivers in Colorado, that is certainly it. In addition, I wanted to talk specifically about where I see some of the challenges for ag and what I think some of the opportunities are. I think one of the things that I am really concerned about that we have seen out of the Polis administration, and one of the things that I think we need to be really, really paying attention to, is the appointment, I'm sure everybody already knows this, of Ellen Kessler to the Veterinary Board. I don't dislike vegans necessarily, but I do dislike people who are vegans and then try to make everybody else be vegan. And I think that should be a really, really big concern for all of us, because we have seen kind of across the country and here in Colorado, this move on many of these issues, not just on the Veterinary Board, or not just on the Ellen Kessler appointment, but on just kind of the entire PR fight surrounding agriculture and animals. I think we've been having a really hard time with these like crazy PETA people who show up with their cameras and these people who want to force everyone to be vegan. And I always joke with my husband that, you know, they always say that Disney ruined young women because they all think that they grow up to be princesses. I think Disney ruined people by overly anthropomorphizing animals and making sure that all animals can talk and have all of, and look, I have my own animals and they very much have personalities, and we all aspire to give animals the best life that they can have. But there is a PR fight right now that is very much skewed against the agriculture industry. And it's really important that we all work together to start to fight back against that stuff, because it is being driven by people who don't understand animals, who maybe go to the stock show once a year and like take pictures with their kids near some cows, and that's the extent of their knowledge. And when that happens and people are so far removed from the actual procurement of their food, whether it's on the plant side or on the animal side, then they don't understand how it works. And therefore, they can make assumptions based on people who have a very specific and often incorrect agenda. So I think that one of the things, I'm really excited today to be able to speak with you all, but also with my friend Mark Truax. I think one of the themes that we really want to underscore is that there is quite an opportunity for the CCA, but for agriculture at large, to be able to start to fight back against some of these themes, and that this is not a thing that we should be giving up on, and that we should all be working together in order to talk about what a productive PR campaign looks like for agriculture at large. Another issue I wanted to bring up that is Colorado-based, that I'm sure you've heard about, but I think is important to note, is the question and the discussion surrounding cage-free eggs. And I realize, like, eggs are not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with cattlemen. However, I do think that that is the theme of where we are heading legislatively, and I think it's a really big concern. One of the things I think that we should be thinking about as an industry and as people who are concerned about these type of things is, I think that we should be concerned or thinking about how to reframe these issues back to the people who live in Denver, or back to the people who don't necessarily understand agriculture. Because one of the things I think that we all take for, or that we don't necessarily think about, is that these people living in these high rises who are consuming our products and who are thinking about that, they have this very like idealized view of what a rancher or what a farmer is, and they really look up to it. I'm personally just doing a little experiment where I'm trying to be an aspiring farmer, maybe someday if I can pull my life together. And I personally so look up to farmers and ranchers, and I know that so many of my peers do as well. And so if I had to reframe the cage-free egg issue, for instance, I would be talking about the fact that that will increase the cost of eggs, and eggs for many people, is especially like single moms, people who are trying to put food on the table for their families, especially in the midst of a pandemic, like that is cheap protein for a mom to be able to feed her children. And that's not something that we necessarily think about, and that's not a way that we frame it. Like that becomes more expensive, and the difference between a $2 and a $4 dozen of eggs to that woman is significant. That becomes the difference between her being able to feed her kids or not. And eggs is one of the cheapest and healthiest sources of protein, especially that you can feed kids. Just as an aside, my grandparents got married down at the cathedral. We're Catholic in Denver. They went and they spent all of their money so that they could stay for 2 nights, I think in 1947 at the Broadmoor Hotel. And then they came home and they were out of money, and my Grammy made my papa eggs. And that's what they did. And because that's their access to cheap protein. And for many people who are living on the margins, who have lost their jobs, who are trying to figure out what they're going to do, that's how they feed their families. And it is the same for beef. And as we continue to implement it's this slippery slope of regulation, all of a sudden, that's the difference between being able to feed your children or not. And that becomes really, really problematic for people. And so thinking about ways that we can all band together and we can reframe these issues in a way that we can have conversations to make it very personal to the people who are sitting in downtown Denver, who are looking up to you, who want their, your life and your food, and they think that what you do is awesome. I think that it's really important that we start to think about that and we start to connect with them, because there are a lot of opportunities for the cattlemen and for ag at large. And I think that really personalizing it for those people, especially the consumers, and especially in a time of COVID and a pandemic and unrest and confusion and fear, which I think that we're seeing across the board right now, is really, really critical. So that is kind of my top-down comments. Terry, are there questions, or are we gonna wait?
Yeah, let's take an opportunity to transition a little bit, and then I was going to announce in the meantime, before we go to our next speaker, if there are some questions, you can always put those into the chat box, send them to me, and I can narrate those, or you can send them to everybody. That's fine as well. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and move on to our next speaker. And Kelly, thank you very, very much. A lot to think about there. I want people to kind of digest that for a little bit.
Sorry, that's a lot. I just kind of like downloaded.
Yeah,
it's hard. It's hard when there's no like back and forth to people. So hit me up with questions.
Yeah, it's so difficult in the virtual world. It's so lacking in so many ways. So Aaron, if you could cue us up here a little bit. I want to introduce our next speaker, and certainly Mark and Kelly are familiar with each other and know each other, but Mark Truax managed PacWest's Denver office and oversees the firm's work in energy. He also works in agriculture, federal affairs, other items that cross his table in a natural resource-based Western economic climate. He's worked within government relations. I've known Mark for a number of years when he worked in DC for the conservation districts. He works in communications, campaign, crisis management. PacWest is a firm that works all over the United States, and his specific outreach is really here in the West. So with that, I'd also mention that PacWest and Mark are working very closely with us as the campaign firm to oppose wolf reintroduction in Colorado. I'm sure Mark will mention that. So Mark, you're currently on mute, but I'd like to transition to you, and we'll pop you up on full screen and hear what your thoughts are today. So welcome.
Well, Terry, thank you very much, and everyone, thank you for joining. I know this is a different world, and as Kelly mentioned, and Terry, a really difficult world as we're operating. I've done a lot of these Zoom presentations, and they never, like Kelly mentioned, you never get used to them. You never get comfortable with a one-way presenting to a camera and a bright light staring you in the face versus being able to interact in the audience. And I do miss that and miss being with you all. I've been to your meeting many times and miss being together, but we will be together again, I have no doubt. Appreciate having you having me on today to walk through it. As Terry mentioned, my background is politics. It's in campaigns, a little different than Kelly's. Kelly focused very heavily on the Republican side. I am not a partisan. You would look at my portfolio and yeah, you're a hardcore Republican, Mark. I am not, nor am I do not focus specifically on Democrats or Republicans. From a campaign perspective, I've done federal lobby in DC, as Terry mentioned, with the conservation districts. I got to work with whoever's in power. I got to work with the electorate and dance with the one that brought us. So for me, I care about half plus one, and really looking to move forward with that to be successful. And that could be passing a bill down at the State House or in DC. That could be working a ballot measure, or that could just be trying to increase the awareness for an industry that I'm working on. A lot of my portfolio is oil and gas. I'm a chief operating officer for Coloradans for Responsible Energy Development, or CRED, that you may be familiar with, the long-term education program in Colorado here. So we do, my half plus one in trying to win isn't always at the ballot box. But we'll talk about both of those today, and Kelly mentioned a lot of it, and it's great to be on a panel with her today as to how it works. I will disagree with Kelly on one thing, though. and we did not script this. And that's on polling. I will agree that the polling coming out of 2016 was less than to be desired. I will concede that argument. However, I think part of it is you've got to look at how that methodology is set up. And part of what the issue in 2016 was the methodology or lack thereof going into that research that had Hillary Clinton winning across the board, and then obviously on election day that had it turned on its head. Because I rely heavily on polling data. And so when I'm working to put together a program, we have to rely on that data. So we are looking at what's the voter makeup, how do we make sure that it is weighted correctly, even if that is counter to what our beliefs are from, well, hey, we want to have more people that think like us. I got to have the people that show up at the polls and who are actually going to be voting. So as we're looking at that, I think you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But I want to be careful with that and not completely dismiss polling because it is a very valuable tool in what we do. And I think we can really utilize it. And there's a lot that learn. I have friends that were on the D side of the aisle on the post-mortem calls after the Hillary loss going, what happened? And it was squarely on the research methodology. So we spend a lot of time on that. And I'll talk about that when we get in with our gray wolf discussion. We're really starting with the grassroots component of this and what we see and what we know. You cannot be discouraged. And what I would ask of you is to think about your own lives and your own work day to day. You are obviously all here. You're giving us an hour of your time today, and you would have several days of your time if we were able to be in person at a normal convention. But think about that and the fact that you're willing to be here. How do we take and translate that passion and that commitment to your neighbors, to your friends, to your other family members, so that we're able to spread the word, whether it's in agriculture, of egg issues, of corn or pesticide issues, of gray wolves being introduced into Colorado. But how do we share that overall passion and commitment to agriculture? That's one thing that we really must look at. And that has to start with you at the grassroots and at the individual levels. I cannot impress upon you. I'm a strategist. I'm a hired gun. I work for PacWest, a political firm. That's what we do. And we come in and build in the messaging and all of that. You're never going to see my face in a TV ad. I try to keep my name out of the newspaper whenever absolutely possible. I leave that to Kelly and her expertise. She's very good at it. I stay behind in the shadows. But what we've got to do is we have to have the members and the individuals that are out on the front lines having those discussions, that being you all. As Kelly said, and I agree wholeheartedly on this, that the citizens of Colorado idolize our farmers and ranchers, believe it or not. They like you, they have respect for you, they know that you put in a good hard day's work, and they really see it. They enjoy their Olathe corn and their Palisade peaches and their Rocky Ford cantaloupes and all of those things that come from Colorado this time of year in harvest. So how we're able to take and translate that into a positive and really putting on that smile and that positive face is how we're able to do this. But a friend of Kelly's and mine, people don't understand where their food comes from and how it does. A friend of Kelly's and Terry's and mine, a guy named Tim Wigley, who passed last year, he always had a phrase that for those in Denver, 2x4s come from Home Depot, milk comes from Safeway, gasoline comes from Chevron on the corner. And if you think about it, that's true. For the average consumer, if I were to go into downtown Denver or Lakewood or Littleton, where I live, and ask people, hey, where'd you get your gallon of milk? They'd say, well, Safeway. They wouldn't understand where it came from. Same with meat, comes from the meat counter at the supermarket. But we've got to be able to dispel that. I've actually been in research where people think that Olathe is a brand just like Dole or Chiquita on bananas versus it being a place and a location where it comes from. But it takes us to be able to change that methodology, and it's incumbent upon us on this call and others within CCA and all of agriculture to really tell that story and not be disgruntled as we do it. Kelly talked a lot about a lot of the negative that's out there, and I will admit there is a lot of it. You've got all of the attacks with the veterinary panels, appointments with Department of Agriculture. We've got deployments on the Wildlife Commission and that sportsmen not being represented there, whole variety of issues. And we can focus on the negatives, or we can just rise above it and go, okay, how do we counter this? And that's where we need to focus, and where I see it. We are 72, 73 days away from the election with gray wolves. And to talk a little bit on that, I've had a lot of conversations with folks that are, well, we're just going to lose, but after we lose, we can then focus on the legal fights and ESA issues and all of that. My sole purpose is on that campaign is to defeat that ballot measure. So when I hear that their folks are already throwing in the towel, it hurts me, because I don't have my strong supporters that are willing to stand up and help us, because they are already defeated. And that's the thing that I see with research. The research now is on our side. We recently were able to do our most recent round of polling, and the numbers move drastically in our favor when the Colorado voters are given that information and given the right information, talking about the fact that wolves have already been studied on the reintroduction from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the commission has decided that it does not make sense. When we also look at it, that this ballot measure does not generate any new revenue for the state. And in a year where we're already facing more than a $3 billion budget shortfall due to COVID, due to tax revenues and other issues, that this is just not the right time. And that the wolves, they're already here. Parks and Wildlife earlier this year have already acknowledged a pack of, I believe it was 6 or 7 wolves up in and around Jackson County that are already in Colorado. When I share that information, and those are our key messages that we're focusing on, when I share that with the average, the traditional Colorado voter, predominantly on the Front Range, they automatically begin to cue in. Well, all right, but if it's going to cost money, if we're already having a budget shortfall, if the experts have already decided that this isn't a good idea, I should vote no. And the numbers move to our side very drastically. And there is a path to victory for us. And Terry and his counterparts in the ag community that are working on the campaign to rethink wolves, we are really have the ability to win and be successful and defeat this ballot measure in November. And I share that from the point of view of don't be defeated. And I think that's, as we're walking through and looking at what needs to happen and how we go through with this, you all are committed and are driving forward with this. Take that passion and help me and help Terry and others defeat this ballot measure. That can be taking, and I know you all have taken our handouts and our flyers to your county meetings and shared within their communities. Now that we have a ballot measure number, Proposition 114, we've got new materials that actually just went to the printer yesterday that are getting printed, and we'll be able to get those out into your community so that you can share that information. But it takes that groundswell, and you sharing that information is just as important as us putting up digital advertisements here on the Front Range. I would as we're looking through it, and you've seen other campaigns do this. We did this several years ago on a number of our campaigns that I worked on with oil and gas, on putting up and using real live farmers and ranchers. And Commissioner Justman out from Mesa County, we sent a TV film crew out and filmed a commercial out on his property, and really look just to be able to say, here it is, and give that clue. People in Denver like that. You all have those resources. Not saying that you have to, but talk about it. Be able to be proud of what you do, because I know each and every one of you are, but don't be afraid to share that story and that information and talk about what livestock, what wolves, the impacts that it would have, how we need to be able to move forward with this. Because the numbers just aren't there, we already have them. This is a bad idea. And as as I kind of wrap up here, the big component is with wolves is trying to connect with the person that on the Front Range that loves and thinks that the wolves are the majestic animal of the West. Terry and I first started working together, Terry, 10 or 11 years ago, on another one of our favorite issues, on the wild horse issue. And I know Callie Hendrickson very well, and she and I worked on that issue while I was in DC. It's the same issue of as wolves, that majestic animal of the West, and that people here on the Front Range and in the metropolitan communities around the Western United States, well, we love the wild horses, and they're going to run freely on the range, and it's your John Wayne movie and your Great Western. Not exactly how that works, and not exactly accurate. So we've got to be able to explain that and talk through that. You all are our best messengers to be able to share that information and to do that. I will do everything in our power. Terry and Aaron and the team will do everything that we can to promote that information through advertising, through social media, through sharing that story at the legislature and with others. But we have to be able to have that. So I would say, in closing, and I want to leave time for questions, please do not be afraid to speak up, to contact me or Terry or Aaron at the office in Arvada there. Talk about, say, hey, I have this story. How can we get this information out? Whether it's on wolves or horses or just a positive story. People like to hear the positive story. There's so much negative going on right now. If there is a positive opportunity to really jump and get in front of it, let us take that opportunity to do so. And don't be afraid, because the success of not only CCA, but of agriculture or of any industry is incumbent upon its members and its staff and those who work in that industry to defend it. I can only defend the organizations and the industries I work for if they're willing to go up and defend themselves. If they're not willing to stand up and take that stand, no one's going to come in behind them to support them. But if you are there standing shoulder to shoulder, you will have your friends in the business community, in industry, in industrial communities that will be willing to stand up with you saying, hey, we need agriculture because they're the lifeblood of our communities. They're able to help us here. So happy to answer any questions on the campaign or other items that we need. I think, Terry, we got a few minutes left there. I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Kelly. I've had a few sent to me, and you see Steve Wooten's quote there about the real agenda that exists behind some of these pieces of legislation. But one of the questions that I got was related to a little bit, Mark. I think you breezed past it, but it's, we shouldn't have a defeatist attitude. We shouldn't feel like that we have lost. And I guess the question that I have is around engagement. It seems like that we have, extreme positions sort of ruling the airway and driving engagement, yet it's kind of like the member of the, we'll pick, Florida legislature that comes back to his constituent and said, I supported you on everything, but I didn't win anything. And that's challenging because you want some of those successes. So how do we break through, for lack of a better term, disengagement in our own constituents? And why is that it's so important to come together and work together toward these common causes? And I'll leave that question for either one of you. How and why?
Well, how, if we're able to crack the nut on how, I think I make a heck of a lot more money than we do, as I don't think there is a silver bullet to do that. And Kelly, you might know, I don't think there is one though. I think you've got to take it in bite sizes and really look, Terry, like you said, we fought, I was 100% vote and we didn't get anything. But if you don't at least try, we're not going to get anything at all. So if we don't start walking and start down that path, there's not going to be an opportunity. I also think we've got to focus on whatever little positives we can, and focus there. And finally, play the 80-20 rule. Find what compromise you can get. And I know compromise is seen lately as a 4-letter word, at least in politics. But play the 80-20 rule. And that might be 80% in favor, and we're going to ignore the 20% we disagree on. Or it very well could be in the reverse, going, we only agree on this 20% and we shall not discuss this other 80%, but let's get this one thing done so that we both can have this one victory. You know, politics makes for interesting bedfellows, and I genuinely believe that. You've got some interesting folks that can come together and align on a topic. Let's take that, because then it will have a snowball and a positive, if you can do it. But just knowing and not having that defeatist attitude, but maintaining a positive, going, if I'm not going to defend my industry, no one else will. And just knowing that you've got it, that gives me enough to get up in the morning and continue to be positive. Hopefully others will rally them behind me. Kelly?
I think one of the most important things is to not allow yourself to be silenced. And it is super easy in this landscape right now to get online or to look at the just the way that people are speaking to each other. Like and just especially the kind of people I know who are ranchers are just not interested in engaging in a conversation with somebody who is acting in the way that so many people act online, and not necessarily being silenced, but just choosing not to engage, because we're all practical people, right? Like, we all have things to do, and for somebody out there, like, your water's on and you need to go turn it off right now, because that's usually me. And so we have things to do, and there are people right now who exist entirely, like their entire lives exist online in order to try to beat you down. And it is really hard when you are a practical person with real things to do and real people to feed out there, to continue to engage with people who frankly are pretty much jerks. But if you don't, then they're the only ones talking, and that becomes the problem. So I would say my big suggestion is don't stop talking. Don't allow yourself to be silenced and to be shouted down by these crazy people who have decided that, like, Beyond Burgers somehow, like, taste normal. They do not. Don't allow them to gaslight you into thinking that Beyond Burgers taste normal. They're gross. And continue to fight back against that stuff, because the problem is that it seems like right now the loudest people are the ones who win the day, and not the practical people. And it's really important to speak as the practical people that you are. Also, just like back to your point, Mark, about polling, I 100% agree with you, especially on issues like the wolf. It's absolutely 100% winnable. I did not mean that all polling is bad. I just meant that, like, there is a chance that President Trump could be reelected, and all of these people who are talking on CNN, like, there's absolutely no way, are wrong, because there's very much a chance. So that was the point. I'm not trying to throw out all polling and say, like, oh, all methodology is bad and all people are bad. I'm a hunter, and I'm absolutely furious about the idea that these gigantic Canadian killer death wolves could be forced into this state, and we should all be talking about that 100% of the time, because it's bad for cattle, it's bad for sheep, it's bad for hunters, it's bad for pretty much everybody, except for a not even the people who think that it's good for them are wrong. They will happen if it happens, and then they will be really sad that they did it, and you can't unring that bell. Like, once it happens, you can't undo it. And so if there is a place to dig in, it is, send Mark your money, your time, and offer to be in an ad if he will do it, and just like fight this to the end, because this is a thing that for those of us who have lived in Colorado all of our lives, this is an issue that could absolutely systemically change our ecosystem for the worse in a really big and significant way. And once it is, that's it. Sorry about the baby screaming. I'll mute myself. Working mom, it's a thing.
That's welcome here. So I've got one other question, and maybe this is just kind of an example of the issues you all have worked on throughout your career, be it through communications, political, or campaign orientated. Can you give us an example of kind of one of those aha moments where things just fell into place and they made a lot of sense, and that it intuitively worked out? Because I think where this question's coming from is that as we look at the agriculture industry, the ranching industry, we all know, we've seen, again, polling that talks about the trustworthiness, the image of the Colorado rancher being fairly trustworthy, until we start talking about what we do, and then that sort of changes people. But relate that to a little bit of one of those aha moments in your career where you were working on an issue and it just really came together in such a way that you were like, the universe is aligned well. And I'm hopeful you have one of these true acts, because if you don't, you may go the other way from that investment curve.
Well, actually, I've got two. I will use COVID as one. And that's in looking at our recent polling on wolves. It really has shifted the message on, is this the right time to do this or not? I had looked at some research earlier in the year, right after we all went on lockdown. Actually, I'm working an issue in Alaska, and we asked a similar COVID question, working a tax issue up there, and it was too soon. People were stuck at home. They were fighting in DC over the CARES Act and the legislation. It was too raw. It was too close to home. People didn't know what was going to happen in the next several months. When are we going to come out of lockdown? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage, my rent, put food on the table? So that message didn't work on either the yes or the no side when I was doing some research beginning of second quarter in Alaska. Fast forward to what we did on wolves. It actually does work, and it became the aha moment going, all right, it really truly is the economy, stupid. If you tie it to the numbers, and it no longer was so fresh and raw in the minds of Coloradans at that point with COVID, that we could talk about the $3 billion budget shortfall at the state, and that this is not the right time for wolves. Again, and many of you have probably heard me say this, my goal is not to get people to not want to reintroduce wolves and have that be their bedrock belief in Colorado. My goal and my job is to get people to vote no on November 3rd. And if that means that I have to get them to cast doubt and be like, well, this isn't the right time because of COVID, maybe we should do it in a couple of years, I'll worry about the couple of years issue down the road. Right now, my main goal is November 3rd, 2020. And if that means utilizing that COVID message, and that this isn't the right time. So that was kind of, those two were my big ahas of, you can use it, but it can't be so fresh that you're going to just unravel everything, and you're not going to lose anything, but you're not going to gain anything. So then why bother?
That's a really good question, Terry. And this actually goes back to the point on how if I got to just be queen of the universe, how I would have messaged the egg issue, which is driving it down to the mom trying to feed her kids. And obviously, like, that's a message that works specifically with me because I wake up every morning and have to feed 2 kids. But and by the way, so do a majority of swing voters, which are unaffiliated women in Colorado. So that's why that message works with them. But my aha moment actually goes back to why I think we should message the egg issue and the beef issue and everything else in that way, trying to really personalize it for people. I don't know if you remember, I can't even remember the year. This is how old I am. But there was a ballot, there was an Amendment 66. It was $1 billion ostensibly for education. It was being pushed by, at the time, Senator Mike Johnston, supported by Hickenlooper. And we were trying to cobble together a coalition of people to oppose Amendment 66 because it was a huge tax increase. It would have been a ton of money. And there are many studies out of tons of places, including places like the Independence Institute, that as we increase classroom, or not classroom spending, but as we increase education spending in Colorado, that's not necessarily translating into our students doing better. We've seen huge increases in administrative costs and all kinds of other stuff. I could talk about education all day long, but when I was working on that campaign, what I did is I took the annual average tax increase and I went to Kmart and I bought all of the school supplies that the average person could buy over the course of a year. It was like, and of course it's Kmart, so it was like a ton of stuff because they were all like $1. So it was just like tons of pencils and backpacks and markers, and then I just went to protest Senator Johnston and Governor Hickenlooper in front of a speech that they were going to give about how we really, really needed this tax increase for education because it's for the kids. And I just took a card table and I set it up and I put all of these school supplies on it. And all of these teachers union people and all of these moms had to walk past my table. And I would be like, this is what you could buy for your kids. Like these are the many things, the calculators and the pencils and when you took that and it was no longer the like, oh, it's 5 cents a day or however they tried to minimize it, but you took it and you aggregated it and you showed people how it would just affect them and their kids. That was my aha moment, because out of all of the many political shticky things that I have done over the years, which is many, not all of which I am proud of, that was one of the things that you realize that people want to understand what the impact is to them. And once you can figure that out and you can figure out what that is, and it sounds like with the wolves, the economy, especially right now, as people are hurting and people are scared, like that, if that's the thing, then like, let's take it and let's drive that message and let's all get behind Mark and figure out how to drive that and how to personalize that for people, because that was really the aha moment for me, where I started to take a lot of these larger theoretical policies and figure out how to try to translate it to a normal person who doesn't, it's not that they don't care, it's just that they do not have the bandwidth to sit around and extrapolate what every policy and what every legislative position will have on their lives. They need somebody to translate for them what the impact will be.
I think you said a lot there. You do have to relate to people on a personal level.
That's what my husband says all the time. You said a lot there.
So true. So true. I mean, you have to make them see it through their own eyes, not through your eyes. And I think that is a salient message to transition a little bit here. And you're welcome to hang on with us as we talk a little bit about the association. But agriculture is all too often guilty by saying we're just not understood. and it's someone else's responsibility to understand us, as opposed to our responsibility to help them see through their eyes what agriculture means to them personally and their family. And if we've taken nothing else from the conversation, I think that's important, because I would say fundamentally that's one of the errors that agriculture continues to make. So Aaron, if you could transition us a little bit, Kelly and everybody feel free to hang on. We're going to talk just a little bit about something that we always talk about, and that's the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. Because let me start by saying, in many, many ways, we're blessed in this organization, not because we're 153 years old, but because we had 153 years worth of producer engagement, to the point that I think we're lacking a little bit today. If you're going to be in this business, you're going to benefit from this business, and you're going to benefit from what these volunteer leaders do. You're going to become, in a cash contribution for membership, or in a way that you give of yourself and your time and your family, part of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association. So the association does a number of things. You can see that we don't have the luxury to not be all things to all people in agriculture, and that's great, because agriculture is so diverse and so many things come forward. And you can see that our core competencies are not a couple of bullet points that we're able to communicate on a nice, pretty piece of paper, but they're far-reaching. They're advocacy, literacy, policy, programs, just a number of things along those lines. So let's step into, if I'm able to operate this presentation screen, which it appears that I'm having some difficulty doing. There we go. So let's start with some of the main things that CCA believes in. We serve people in the land. We care about the resources that we have deeply, because ultimately cattle are a byproduct of that. But most importantly, we do represent beef producers in Colorado. And those beef producers have an opportunity to join this association voluntarily. They do manage it cooperatively. And I think without a coalition of beef producers, we would not have success. We're not able to come to Denver individually. We're not able to be at all of the meetings and all of the issues individually. We have a volunteer board of directors of 15 people. We have 300 people on steering committees. We have nearly 50 local associations, everybody attempting to make an impact on behalf of the beef industry. We need more. Quite honestly, we can't be complacent. We need more. We are probably at the lowest level of engagement in the beef industry that we've seen for 50 years. And I think that people are tired of the rhetoric, so they feel like that they just want to ignore it and lay out. And as they do that, I've learned this through COVID. Our adversaries aren't. They have been at work night and day, counting on the fact that this industry, one of the last great bastions of conservative, resource-based, physical ownership of things like land and livestock and energy, will ignore them, will not pay attention to their subtle yet strategic moves. So we need to advance that legacy. One of the things that those of you that have children will probably share with me, one of my biggest turning points in life was realizing that I had a responsibility to the future. I always recognized that my parents had 2 biological children and 1 natural resource-based child, that being the ranch. And I love my parents dearly and they love me, but I'm not sure which one got treated better at times. The biological children or the natural resource-based children, being the ranch. But I also understand that today. We understand things by saying that, you don't want to be the one to lose the ranch. Well, I don't want to be the one that doesn't leave the ranch in a financially prosperous, stable capable way for the future generation. And I know I can't do that without help. I know that I need organizations like this association, not just because I work for it, but because I see what it's able to do. I know that I need the Colorado Cattlemen's Associations of the world to be there for me. And it's important to recognize that there are those that don't understand that. We heard Kelly and Mark talk about that in great detail today. Beef will continue to be served, but will we still be that center of the plate? Will we still be the center of people's minds when they eat that beef? Will they correlate that beef meal that they're enjoying or that open space that they're seeing with agriculture in their policy decisions? We have tremendous challenges and opportunities ahead of us in this industry for this legacy, for our future, for my children and your grandchildren. We are going to see increased demand for the products that we produce, but we have to be able to produce those products. We need to do that in a free market, entrepreneurial way, but we need to have a fair and balanced chance at that production. And that comes from us pulling together and working toward common goals that take care of our natural resources, that take care of our bottom line, and that take care of the communities that take care of us. That truly is the definition of sustainability. I hear so much rhetoric negative about sustainability. Whoever would have thought that the masters, the fathers, the mothers of sustainability would be so reticent to embrace and drive forward that underpinning, that philosophy into the future. And our industry will continue to advance through technology, but we'll also be grounded in our history. And we're committed to doing what we've done for generations, but doing it in different ways. And so advancing that legacy is not only a tagline of the association, but it's really an ethos for the organization. Nobody's entitled. CCA is not entitled to its membership. What you're seeing now is a list of 50 issues that we're currently tracking as an organization. I'm not going to break down and talk about each one of those, but you can read about them in your next publications. But we do feel strongly about earning that membership. And when you are brave enough to go out and ask a neighbor or to ask the next generation to assist you as a leader in this industry by joining the Colorado Cattlemen's Association and working on things in a fashion that were outlined by Kelly and Mark, and they want to know, what is it exactly my $200 have done for me in the last year? I want you to reflect on this list, because this is a list that your organization, you as producers, you that hire a staff, you that volunteer, are working on daily. 50 very deep, very detailed opportunities and challenges to build a better tomorrow for the beef industry. I was truly impressed when I started compiling this list by reaching out and talking to and engaging not only internally our staff, but our leadership and our committees. There are things that our leadership through committees work on that we have touch points on throughout the year, but they're so dedicated to the organization, they drive forward with those on their own. Labor, natural resources, species listings, state lands, federal lands. We're currently experiencing a checkoff referendum. We talked about sustainability, water, the victories that have been had by those who have given, like the NEPA rule that has been changed, federal grazing, BLM grazing rules, so much that has been done and so much to do. So when you think about the organization and you want to know if you're going to join next year, or more importantly, if you're going to bring someone else into the family called the Colorado Cattlemen's Association, and you look at those children, you look at those grandchildren, you look at those consumers, and you ask yourself, are these issues important? Are they worth $200? Absolutely, without a doubt. We can all afford that. So my challenge to you today is to advance that legacy. If not for yourself, for Kelly's child that she's got on screen right now. for your grandchildren, for the great-grandchildren that you may not know yet, for your neighbors, for your community, for your way of life. Our mission is to be the premier cattlemen's association, but it's not about CCA. CCA is only an entity of its members. It's about you, the beef producers, advancing the legacy of production as we have for 150 years plus into the next 150 years. I hope that you're as committed to this as we are. I hope that you go out today when you see this and you actually engage someone in a dialogue about giving back and about engaging and about not being complacent and about not feeling defeated, because we live in a great state with great opportunity if we take the challenge to advance that legacy to the next generation. So with that, I thank you all, but I also want to take a bit of a time to thank our sponsors. You'll see a number of those listed here that helped make the 2020 annual convention of the Colorado Cattlemen's Association a success. Without those individuals, we would not have had the success that we did in a very abnormal year. Without them, we wouldn't have the industry we have, because they're our partners in business and agribusiness alike. I also want to say special thank you to the dedication of individuals that help us make this possible. Mark, I appreciate your work on the wolf. I appreciate your work on oil and gas. I appreciate your dedication to Colorado agriculture. And Kelly, I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule. It's a big thing to barter for everything that you consume in life. And you're taking that on with great gusto. You're raising a family. You're also being a spokesperson for Colorado and the Colorado that we've known for 150 years. So with that, I also thank those of you that chimed in on this. We'll be rebroadcasting this for others to view in the future. And we're just a short phone call away. We're a short email away. If we can be of assistance on anything, you know that the Colorado Cattlemen's Association and its volunteer members and leaders will be there for you. So with that, we're going to close out this last virtual session of the 2020 annual convention and look forward to seeing you next month in the Rally for Rural Colorado, which will take 14 stops through the state, talking about issues important to the rural parts of our state, the economic engine that never took a day off. Thank you.